there is an elevation of our industry that we need to take advantage of from the standpoint of being heard on some of these issues. We're growing these larger practices where we have to work with people that come outside of our industry of being recognized for not just quote unquote, I've heard it too many times, not being just a veterinarian.
Welcome to Vet Life Reimagined. I really hope in this episode you can reimagine veterinary medicine, veterinary business, as well as your veterinary career. Dr. Julie Smith was part of paving the way for women leadership in the profession. She is a board-certified veterinary surgeon and recently retired from SAGE Veterinary Centers in 2022 after a 25-year career. She started as an associate surgeon. She became a practice owner, then moved to a managing partner, medical director, board member, and chief strategy officer. She has seen many aspects of veterinary business and also obtained an MBA in the midst of it. In 2017, she was honored one of Silicon Valley's Business Journal Women of Influence Award. She is still active in the American College of Veterinary Surgeons. She started a nonprofit called SAGE Compassion for Animals, and she is currently a career and leadership coach. She knows the importance and value of the veterinary voice in the larger ecosystem. We talk about current and future possibilities in vet med and so much more. Let's get to the conversation with Dr. Julie Smith. I think for a podcast that is talking about all the possibilities in career, you are an ideal guest because now you actually help coach people on careers and leadership. So very perfect. And then you yourself have had a really cool career journey. So I'm excited to dive in a little bit more there. But we all had a starting place. So when did you know that you wanted to get into veterinary medicine?
Yeah, well, thank you, Megan, for inviting me. It's really cool what you're doing. And I was the classic, supposedly declared at the age of 3 that I wanted to be a veterinarian, according to my mother. So grew up with pocket pets and kitty cats and dogs and so forth. So a little bit of horse, but mostly around small animals and so forth. And luckily, I guess you could say that I did have a penchant for science and math. So that helped me in school to continue on the journey, but also made sure and worked at Humane Society, worked as a kennel help in a veterinary clinic. So really kind of, also got to know what the profession was really about, not just loving animals, which of course is mostly why we're all here.
Yes, thank you for saying that. Because of course, if you are a veterinary professional, you probably get the little kid that says, I want to be a veterinarian because I love animals. And you're like, you might need a little bit more to hang in there. The other thing that I thought was interesting is, this really speaks to how quickly I think veterinary medicine has really changed in that now the percent of veterinary classes that are women are about 80%, and that was not quite the case for you. So I'm very curious on your experience going through vet school.
Well, actually, yes, I do have the gray hair that you can't see on the podcast. Actually, our class, so I graduated in 92 from UC Davis, and our class was actually highlighted in Parade magazine for having the highest percentage of female students in any professional school to date, and it was 75%. So my class was actually one of the first, close to that 80%. The gentleman got a lot of teasing for the women in our class because we could gang up on them because there were so many of us. But yeah, it was exciting to see that. But you're right, the veterinarians I worked for before getting into veterinary school were men. Now it's changed, but when I was at UC Davis, there's 2 women on faculty, and only one was tenure track. So yes, I did not have a lot of female role models until I went to my internship at North Carolina State, and there was a lot of women faculty. So I was really, really excited to see that, and that definitely seeing that kind of shift over my course of the career. I think I told you, when I chose the first practice to work at in private practice as a surgeon, I chose it because it had half men and half women. And I was the sixth surgeon, so it was going to be equal. Yeah. So to see that shift and to be a part of it has been really exciting. And to just see, again, women empowerment in business as well as in this profession is really cool and a very important thing for me to help give back to the community with coaching or in philanthropy and so forth. So,
yeah, which we're going to get to. When it comes to surgery, when did you figure out that you wanted to specialize and become a board certified veterinary surgeon?
Yeah, this is a pattern in my life. It's like when I kind of get something, I just go, oh, that seems like I should do that. So I didn't know about veterinary specialists, even though I always wanted to be a veterinarian and, read all the books and saw the movies and worked in the veterinary space. I didn't realize that there were specialists in particular, not just an academic. So when I got to Davis and kind of learned about that, I said, well, gosh, that seems something I should do. And I chose surgery for a couple of reasons. Back then, it really was one of the only specialties that were in private practice to any degree. And most of the other ones that were out there wasn't a large group. So knowing that I wanted to go into private practice and work in a business situation, I wanted to choose a specialty that supported that. And I'm just one of those people like to check the box and say that it's done. So diabetes was not going to be something that that I fell in love with compared to surgery and working with my hands as well as my brain, if you will, and just having kind of as I said, an endpoint. That's just my personality.
I'm curious because I'm kind of speaking for myself. For others out there where surgery is slightly intimidating to them, do you ever have any pieces of advice to give, whether it's honestly, it could be a student, but it could also be already a practicing veterinarian where surgery is a little scary for them?
From the standpoint of how I approach a surgery is something I actually have taken into, and I'll use it to explain even making decisions or being prepared for other types of decisions, whether it's business management or surgery, is I always think in having a plan A, a plan B, and all the way down to D, at least, as well, even more if it's more complicated. So really understanding what could be needed in the unexpected, because, if you don't usually get to leave the OR table and go figure it out, you have to figure it out there. So taking things to worst case scenario and being able to think through it in the moment is probably the most scary. But if you prepare yourself for it, and that means if you're working side by side with people, obviously, that you can talk with, or getting on the phone to a surgeon in your area, or, these days, getting on a video call with a surgeon in your area ahead of time. Because I will say it's not as fun when you're a surgeon, you get a phone call when somebody is stuck in the OR and needs some advice, because that just makes everybody super worried. I think it's preparation and making sure that you have those plans. And that's just kind of how I think about things in general. And I think by having backups or having, if this goes, then I can do that, or this, you just feel more confident that way. And sometimes it just is experience. You do kind of have to take a little bit of a leap. And if you have somebody that can leap with you or be by your side, another practitioner, or even a very experienced veterinary technician, I've definitely benefited from some of them giving me advice over the years too.
Yeah, I think that's great. And just coming back from the Veterinary Innovation Summit not too long ago, some of the potential resources for getting more experience, practicing, even using AI to do those things, those are all hopefully going to be helpful with education and training, just to give you a little bit more confidence going into some of these situations. So yes, hopefully we can do even more going forward there. You also said that you were interested in ultimately going to private practice, which is one of the things you liked about this specialty. You became a practice owner just a couple years after getting board certified. So was that always kind of a goal that you had, was to become an owner?
Yeah, and I can't put my finger on it completely, but I worked in some small private practices that were one or two doctor primary care practices in school. And my father is an attorney and worked at a bank, so maybe his business acumen kind of rubbed off on me. And so it was always something that I was interested in, as well as the practice of surgery, if you will. So having that opportunity to go into private practice after I was a year on faculty, and I enjoyed it, and I could have stayed, but I had this opportunity to come back to the Northern California area, which is, I'm a California native. So it was something that was important to come back to the state. And so when I had that opportunity to work in a group practice, so I didn't have to come out and work by myself, which was doable, but not as enjoying. And we're able to work with, and at that point in time, it was actually, as I mentioned, I was the sixth surgeon in a practice that was known as Veterinary Surgical Associates in the way back. And we did both mobile surgery and in-hospital surgery. So you learned quickly, especially mobile surgery, you had to have all those plans, A's, B's, and C's, because you didn't have your full equipment with you. So you got really creative. Back in the day, I think, in the early 90s, and I guess now we're in the late 90s into the early 2000s, you still were a little bit more of a jack of all trade, even coming out as a surgical specialist. I remember having to put in like a stomach tube with a scope. Oh, I don't know how to do that. So I figured it out because there weren't a lot of internists around, and certainly this was a mobile practice as well. And we would, back in, for those of you who weren't in veterinary medicine at the time, the model for specialty and emergency was very different than it is now. Now these tend to be larger specialty emergency hospitals all under one roof. And back then, it was still coming out of the emergency clinics, were generally night only and weekends. They were put together by the primary care veterinarians in the community to help them with overnight care. And then a lot of times as specialists, we'd come out and we would lease space from the emergency clinic during the day. And so that's kind of how a lot of specialty clinics started. And that certainly was the model that we had. And so it was a much more, I think the practices were called condo style, and probably still are, when you have under one roof different businesses. So you have the surgery group that just does surgery, you have the medicine group that just does medicine, you have the emergency group that just does ER, and they're all owned differently. And that started to kind of shift in the early 2000s, bringing the practices under the same business umbrella, even though they all worked collegially, very well together clinically for the most part. So it was a completely different business model. And I think we're starting to see some evolution of business models yet again in our space, in the veterinary clinic private space. And even in the academic space, there are more and more different models are coming out there, which is great to see, changes as you are a big innovator yourself. We're going to be innovating at the business level as well as the medical level.
Can we go there? Because this is actually about what I was going to ask you, because you did become a part of several hospitals and you worked your way up to, I want to say this correctly, Chief Strategy Officer. So, I mean, that is a very businessy type of role. And you talked about, your father, maybe you had seen some of those business acumen skills. But can you speak to that? Like, what were you able to witness when you are focused on actual strategy in the hospital? What did you see then? And what are you seeing as some of the evolutions and innovations when it comes to some changes currently?
Right. So I lived through being a practice owner from the late 90s in a veterinary only owned business that grew fairly large in the Northern California and became SAGE Veterinary Centers. And I became one of the managing partners of that practice while we were still privately held. And so that was, back in the day, we're starting to bring on a lot more staff, a lot more managers, a lot more business folks from outside of veterinary medicine to help us run our clinics, as opposed to doing everything ourselves, which was kind of the old model and still probably is in a small practice. With that, that's when I decided to focus on the business, because it's hard to be a full-time surgeon and a full-time business owner with a practice that had 60 plus veterinarians in it. So that's when I went back to get the MBA and essentially came off the clinical floor and really focused on the business part of it. I was lucky enough to be able to do that and had great partner support for that. And then we did the classic, we're really big, but we also need to continue to grow. And we made the decision to take on an investment partner from private equity. We were their first veterinary practice. It was a tough decision, but it was the right decision for the practice at the time. And when that happened, because you're no longer an owner, business owner as a partner, you're now a shareholder as part of a larger business. And so it's just you switch from a partnership to a corporation, essentially. And so that's when I became chief strategy officer, because we needed to grow, but it was going to be in a way mostly through acquisition and not just operational. So that's not something that I had a lot of experience with. So we brought on somebody that did, and she was wonderful to help guide us through that. And then with chief strategy officer, which was kind of cool, is it's one of those things that's not well defined. So I got to make it up. And so basically I kind of took what strategies could we do from the standpoint of not just acquisition, because that's, again, I helped with that because I have networks in the community, but that wasn't my bailiwick. So what other things could we do to grow or to be the practice we want to be? And so it's a very project-based endeavor, which was different than as managing partner. And I was also the medical director, where I was kind of overseeing all the doctors. It's very different to go from that to project-based and team-based. But it was a different way to think about how you work. When you're supervising a bunch of doctors, and I had done all the hiring and the recruiting and all of that, and people management, a lot of that, which has its own rewards. But now I was working without a team under me, but I had to be able to bring the team together that I needed to get the project done. So it's still very people focused. In fact, I think that's one of the things I learned all throughout my career, is that we all get into it because we love animals, but it's really a people-centric world, because we're a service industry. And so you do have to get to work with the people. And I found that that's what I really loved to do, is loved working with the people who loved animals. So to take on that role, it was a very different mindset, but it was also kind of fun because it allowed me to stay nimble enough and within the entire organization to get to kind of know, to bring the marketing team along while we're trying to bring on, online pharmacy, where you need the inventory person, you need the operations groups, you need the doctors, you need everybody to kind of weigh in on these things. And then you have to determine, when do they weigh in? So it's a lot. It's still problem solving. It's still like, I need plan A, B, C, and D for surgery. I need it for online pharmacy. I think that's one of the things that I hope people understand as they look at their career arc, is that a lot of the skills we learn as a veterinarian or as a specialist or whatever are all very transferable. So, you don't have to compartmentalize yourself. You can see, what did I learn? And now how can I apply that to what I want to do now? So I don't know if I even answered the question, because I went off on a stream, but.
Oh, no, this is great. And what I love about what you were doing too is you were very knowledgeable in so many different aspects. So you could connect people to solve problems. So you could bring in further experts. But I think one thing that I also want to be aware of is making sure that the veterinarian voice, the veterinary team voice, isn't lost in some of the business decisions too. And you had lived it, you knew those people, like you said, you'd hired those people, so you knew them, you loved them, and you are also able to advocate that the business decisions were also going to be good for the people that were involved back in the clinic. Am I correct there? At least that's what I see.
Yeah. And I think that isn't currently an issue within our industry, because we do now work with so many people outside of the, core. They didn't grow up in veterinary medicine like a lot of us did. And that's not a bad thing. In fact, that's a good thing, is to have different perspectives. And that makes a much richer decision environment. And unfortunately, it does become, especially with the larger groups, corporations are never inherently bad or good, just like people. So, but this us versus them mentality, where the veterinarians, they're the business people, is really not helpful for anybody involved, because it sets apart people not wanting working together for a common goal, whether it's the organization that you're working on, whether it's a surgery that you're doing. It doesn't really matter if your technician isn't there to help you with your anesthesia, whether you're doing surgery because they're playing on their phone. Believe you me, I've seen it. It's not a good thing, so everybody has to be pulling towards the same goal, and everybody has something to contribute. Now, in particular, where we're at in veterinary medicine, we are where we're at, and there's going to be, as I said, some innovative business models that are going to be still veterinary led, and there's going to be some innovative business models that are led by corporations. And it's going to be the ones that can combine operational talent with financial talent. We've been really focused in our world in the financial component for some really good reasons. We needed to pay veterinarians and veterinary technicians and veterinary staff more. We probably needed to raise some prices, but we're getting to a point where that's not going to be as easy as it was. And so we need to also focus on other things that can provide sustainability to practices that are not just financially focused. They have to be operationally focused, but they can't just be inefficient operations, which I think some of us were a part of back in the 90s and the early 2000s. So, and then of course, obviously innovations such as technology come to play, and veterinarians have not been traditionally great at adopting technology. I think the data I still heard is around only 50% of veterinary practices have electronic medical records.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. When I was doing my internship, I went through a hospital change from paper to, I don't know if that says how old I am, but maybe it doesn't, because 50% still are on paper. But
Right.
but during my internship, I went through that transition. So I do know it's challenging, but there are a lot of benefits, speaking from someone who actually had to go through a change to those electronic records. So yeah, absolutely. We have some opportunities. And if you are able to elaborate even further on some innovations when it comes to business models, I think that would be very interesting. You don't have to give trade secrets or anything.
No, I haven't. Yeah. So yeah, I retired from the veterinary clinic practice, but I think that where you're going to see is from the standpoint of ownership, and this happened before we actually had an investment where we were still privately held. We had a number of our associates, some wanted to become partners and a lot of them didn't. And some of it was because of financial, but actually quite a bit of it was they didn't necessarily want to get involved in things like people management. Whether you hire people or not, if you're a business owner, you are managing your people. And because you are the leader. So you have an extra responsibility there. And that's a hard one, especially growing up. I think what we've learned is now so much in veterinary school, they are teaching a lot of what people, call soft skills for whatever reason around communication and so forth. And we're talking a lot about mental health and psychological safety, is that those skill sets can be all learned about how to manage people. But they have to be learned. You have to make an effort for it. And I think a lot of times in a technical industry, whether it's us or engineering has the same issues, a lot of people kind of move up a chain because they're good at what they do. I'm a good engineer, I'm a good veterinarian, so now I'm a manager. The skill sets making you a good veterinarian are absolutely not the same skill sets you have to manager. So, when we start to look at more innovative models, we're going to look at probably a combination of how do you get not just ownership per se, but maybe equity in businesses so that you can create a little bit of wealth that way, but maybe not take on the management component of it. I'm just a shareholder, like I would own shares of Coca-Cola or something like that. Obviously, I'm more invested in this because I work here too. So I still have some leadership, but maybe not as much of the responsibility as a true practice owner does in most everything that is going on in that practice. And I think we're also seeing, the rise of the medical leadership, of the medical directors positions, whether they be, regional, hospital-based, specialty-based, there's lots of different models out there so that you want to grow in your career. But again, you're not necessarily the practice owner. So I think we're going to start to see the division we have between ownership and leadership. They don't always have to go together. And you may want different parts of that as a veterinarian as you grow in your career. And so the companies that can really think, how do I attract people that are going to want to work in this practice or even, again, just in academia too, for a long period of time, is you need to create that environment for them. This is what they want to do. This is where they want to grow. This is where they want to be. And we've been so focused on, recruiting and the quote unquote workplace shortage. Don't get me started on that, but that we forget that retention is the thing. And retention doesn't always have to do with money. Money has to be important enough that you're paying everybody the wage they deserve. But at the same point in time, it doesn't have to be the top. Workplace environment comes first. And so the groups that can focus on that, whether it again be corporations or private ownerships, you need to be able to set the workplace culture and the workplace environment with intent. And all of this can be learned. There's lots of data out there. And I think there's data now within our veterinary space, but there's been data around that for 15, 20 years outside of our world. And we tend to not look outside of our world as much as we should to find out these answers. But I think groups that can really spend time focusing on retaining people, good people, making sure they can grow within their career. And that takes time. And what we've been having over the last 10-ish years is groups coming in that have a very short time window to make their investment back. And that's the private equity world. Even larger groups that have the ability to have a longer lead time as far as their investment return, or a privately held veterinary clinic that has a little bit of longer lead time, they can take the time to do these things. And it's well worth it. Spending a year or two to really get that nailed down is going to pay off in droves, but you need the time and you need the focus to do that. And there's lots of groups out there that can help you. You can hire people to help you with these things. The biggest thing is it has to be with intent. And it has to come from leadership within the organization, however that's structured. And I think once you get that, then everything starts to churn, because happy people that have worked in your clinic for a long time tend to be very efficient people. Efficient people get stuff done in less time for less money, and you're going to see better margins. And all of that stuff will happen if it's focused on. And I think that's what we're going to see is we're going to see operational focus. We're going to see people focus. And those are going to be the groups that are going to be successful, because the ability to just come in and buy a bunch of practices is changing, especially with the FTC now clamping down. And yes, that was my practice. I was a part of that. So I got to see it. It's very exciting. So they're paying attention. The ability to just grow financially through acquisition is fading away.
Do you mind elaborating on what you were talking about?
Oh, the FTC?
Yes.
I think the first ruling they had was a few years ago now. Well, pre-COVID, I'll just put it that way. Everybody knows what pre-COVID means. When Mars purchased Blue Pearl, they had to divest a couple of the hospitals because of competition issues. And so when NVA acquired SAGE Veterinary Centers as well as Ethos Veterinary Health in 2021 now, they also had to divest as well as have now, before they can acquire certain practices in certain areas, have to get FTC approval. So that's mostly in the specialty market. However, that's probably also going to be looked at more and more in the primary care market. It's just less consolidated because there's more of them. The problem is the older model of being able to quickly get a return on investment through acquisition and then move it into a larger organization for sale is very much hampered by that. So especially in the specialty emergency market. That's where I think you're starting to see groups coming up that have more along the lines of equity sharing within the organizations, no plan to necessarily change out and flip into a different ownership, but to continue to grow and exist rather than have an exit planned in 3 to 5 years.
And you talked a lot about what I think the corporations might be able to do to be successful in the hospital. But for the, as you called it, the operational side, so the veterinary teams, right. When I think some of the corporations and consolidations, like all of these, I think tend to make some people nervous when it comes to being on the operational sides. So what are things that they can do to help encourage collaboration and a successful practice? And I know that there's only so much you can do, but I am a believer that there's probably something. So what have you seen that people have done very well when it comes to this changing business model and allowing them to success individually, but also just to contribute to the success of the business?
Yeah, I think this is where it goes back to our world is made up of people, working together as a team. And this comes, from like sporting background and so forth, is that learning to work as a team to be successful with a common goal is something that you can do as a front staff person. It's something you can do as kennel help. It's something that you can do as a veterinary technician. It's something that you can do as an associate surgeon or associate doctor, or all of those things can be done. And that creates that positive workplace environment. And again, it's trying not to do that against somebody else, like against your manager or against the boss or whatever. I mean, I don't know how many times when even we were privately held. And so, I'm working side by side with another surgeon or a technician, and they'll say something, I can't believe SAGE is having us do this. And I'm like, I look at them and I'm like, I'm SAGE. I'm the one that made the decision. It's not this, monolith of things, whether you're independent or a corporation. It's always people making the decisions. And guess what? People are doing their best, you hope. And it's mostly a best guess. You never know what's going to happen. You're basing it on experience. You're basing it on data. You're basing it on what you think is going to happen. But until something gets decided and done, you don't know. Let's go back to, you were talking about practice management software implementations. Those are horrible and ghastly. I've done 3 of them, and from DOS. So that's where I was starting. It was not just paper, but from DOS. Anyway, everybody hates them. Everybody rails against them. And it's going to happen. It's not going to stop because you've already paid for all of this. So instead of railing against it and hating it, going, what can I do to make this better? Instead of having this feel like it's being thrust upon me, what can I do to say, you know what? we tried this setting in the software and it's really, it's causing this issue downstream. I can see it because I'm the technician that has to deal with it. I can see it because I'm the doctor that's dealing with it. The people that are implementing it may not see it. So I'm going to say, well, maybe let's try this setting, or let's try this to solve this whatever. And so coming at it from the feeling of I can contribute because of my perspective is different, and hopefully creating an environment in which I can be heard. That's the other thing. If you're in a position that you need to listen to people, listen. And just creating it with a mutual respect of this person has value to contribute. I need their contribution. And okay, well, maybe my decision, I made the best one I could. So instead of getting defensive, say, oh, well, thank you for providing that I didn't even think about that. Now, was I throughout, everybody who's ever met me knows that I can be defensive and angry when somebody does that to me, but I'm getting better, over time. So it's a matter of feeling that you're not just having stuff done to you as a part of the team. You can play that role, and then you can just talk angrily, with your friends in the corner, but that's not really creating a positive work environment for you, let alone the other people around you. Contributing and really think of yourself as a member of the team, and, just assume you are until proven otherwise. That's the other piece. I always say, assume positive intent, because most people don't show up to work going, I'm just going to be a jerk. I'm going to be really just a pain in everybody's butt because that's my decision today. People showed up to work and are acting like that for a reason that you probably don't know. Something happened at home. Something's happening to their health. Something's happening, and they're not sharing it, and that they don't need to. You just have to assume they probably didn't show up being a pain in the ass. Sorry, I don't know if I can say ass on your podcast.
Sure. And I think that's great because, victim mentality never helps anybody. I think it is better. It sounds like there needs to be a lot of communication, and communication is two directions. So you can do your part on giving the feedback nicely, to make it easier on the leadership team, because you don't want to put them in a defensive position by making it sound accusatory instead of helpful, and said, hey, from my perspective, this is really challenging. Is there a different setting we can use? Or, something, even if you don't fully know another option, at least say you're open to it.
Assuming positive intent and taking accountability is probably two skill sets. Oh, and self-awareness. I'll just throw that in there because you need that for the other two. If you can develop that, reading books, listening to podcasts, that was a huge component of my ability to kind of move and change in my career, was the ability to really kind of take a look at myself and how am I contributing or not contributing, or contributing in a way that's not helpful. And that's where things like, a coach or even a mentor, which are different things, or even a therapist, depending on where it's coming from, can really help you, because it is literally until you can, put your oxygen mask on first, then you can help other people. If you can't do that, then it's very hard for you to help other people. So I think that's where the accountability comes in. Are you contributing in any way to this situation that you're not happy with in your life? Or even if you're contributing 5%, and the other person is contributing 95% to the problem, fix the 5%. That's what you can fix.
5%, that's 5% you can control. Go for it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I want to be able to ask you a couple more questions, and I know we're running out of time. There was one award or recognition that you received, and I was very interested in this. So you were awarded one of the Silicon Valley Business Journal Women of Influence Awards. And this, I think it was 2017, if I remember correctly. I didn't write that one down. And you had to pay the subscription to read the full article. But even in the first sentence, I could tell they said that among these women that were recognized were from Microsoft, eBay, Adobe, NASA. And I'm so excited to have veterinary medicine represented. But I'm curious, what was it that had you get the award and be recognized?
Well, I think that's one of those awards that, kind of the business community puts together for themselves, if you will. And so back in that time frame was the time frame where we were kind of at our largest and having it, well, I mean, we're larger now, I guess, but when we were still privately held. And that was where, we really had kind of a footprint in the San Francisco Bay Area community. And we had 4 major hospitals within that area. And, SAGE Veterinary Centers was a known name. I think I'm just going to 2 cents on branding. Don't name your hospital veterinary hospital, blah, blah, blah. Name it something that's meaningful. Anyway. So SAGE was a known entity. And I think from the standpoint of, I was nominated, I think just because I was a female leader, which was very important to me. And probably, if you think about at that time, we were, I think, 14 partners and the majority were women. So we probably held the largest veterinary practice, privately held practice in women-led during that time. And in fact, the CEO took over after our investment was a woman as well. So I think a lot of that contributed was just the fact that we were able to grow, a business that was a significant component of the veterinary medical industry within the San Francisco Bay Area. And I just happened to be the face of it at the time. So I don't think it was necessarily me.
Yeah. Well, but how neat is that, veterinary medicine got recognized in this unique way? And I think, big is not always bad. I think everything can contribute in a different way. The small veterinary practices, they still have fantastic value as well. Back to the, nothing is all bad or nothing is all good. There are some benefits to being a larger corporation that you got recognized by an outside industry. And that can actually be very beneficial for the industry as a whole, as veterinary medicine is being recognized and seen as innovative, and we get more help from the outside to collaborate and innovate. So I think that's really neat.
No, it's a really good point because, I think veterinary medicine and some of the minds of people are all creatures great and small, which is a lovely show. But at the same point in time, that's not what we do anymore, So I do think recognizing, we have a number of DVMs in Congress, and doing things that people don't understand is so important in what veterinarians contribute to what we eat. And we learned that a little bit with the pandemic, disease processes and so forth. And so I think there is an elevation of our industry that we need to take advantage of, from the standpoint of being heard on some of these issues. This goes back to, again, as we're growing these larger practices where we have to work with people that come outside of our industry of being recognized for not just quote unquote, I've heard it too many times, not being just a veterinarian, but being able to contribute in a different way. And we have to take control of that. It's our story to control. It's our narrative.
What a beautiful thing for this podcast, because that's exactly what we're trying to do, is not only taking over the narrative, but even completely changing, just veterinarian. I never want to hear that in conversation, right? Because veterinarian means so much. I want that to be endless possibilities of definitions for an individual, because we do need to have contribution in so many different areas, because from what you said earlier, the transferable skills that we have, but also we can go in so many different places and add a lot of value. And we are able to, whether it's advocating for other parts of veterinary medicine or whatnot, like it just gets me so excited, as you can tell, that we can empower individuals with that, but also, really thinking about this now is empowering the profession as a whole, because we're giving that permission for us to be part of more conversations, because we are going to be impacted by those conversations. We might as well be there. So,
yeah, very well said.
Yeah. Well, anytime somebody starts a nonprofit, you have to be pretty passionate about it. So I did want to be able to chat a little bit about your nonprofit. Not only did you start a nonprofit, but it was in the middle of the pandemic. So
Yeah.
So you really have to be passionate about it. SAGE C4A is to help provide financial assistance to pet owners. It was so funny because I was just having this conversation. Some of the things that can lead to really a lot of challenge practicing veterinary medicine is having those conversations where you, as a health provider, you found the problem, you're a problem solver, you found the problem, great, and you can offer a solution. But sometimes these solutions are very expensive, and it makes it a really hard decision for pet families who really adore their pets, and we want what's best for their pet too. So this is really exciting. I wanted to see if you could share maybe the story behind it and anything else about it that you'd like to share.
Yeah. So, and I will say there's a number of other groups out there that I've learned from over the years. So yeah, so Sage Compassion for Animals came out of the intersection of me being a chief strategy officer. A, it's a strategy to look into, and B, something that our group had always talked about and wanted to do, because we do see that intersection, especially I think as, specialists. A lot of some of these come out of specialty groups, to tell you the truth, because it's so expensive. But at the same time, we can fix a lot of weird things that people, to our earlier point, may not even be aware that veterinarians do, half the time. So it really was in service of both the veterinary team that can use their training to the fullest, certified technicians, veterinary specialists, primary care, even, we work with low-cost community groups, that are out there, trying to do as much as they can for the community of low-income people. And so it just kind of came from the, desire of seeing this problem for a number of years, seeing some people come up with similar solutions, and just having the time and the grace to put something like that together. And so we're able to do that and work with an attorney to get the 501c3. So it is this completely separate entity from the veterinary centers. I know there are some groups out there that combine it and use it for just their practice, which is fine. But in order to really get 501c3 status, we are agnostic. So we do work with about 43 different clinics now in the San Francisco Bay Area. And, we'll work with anybody who wants to help out. And we do require that the practice give a discount. It's not insignificant, but it's not horrible. It's 25%. So it's a little bit more than, a senior discount or something like that. But that really tells us that this is a client they want to help. And it's important for us to work with the veterinary team. We don't want to be a nonprofit that's dictating the medicine in any stretch of the imagination. We want your best, what you would recommend for this pet, no matter what their financial, take the finances out of the equation. What's the best medicine? Practice your best medicine. Then we can help write that check for the work that you did. And the client has to contribute a little too, so that everybody has a stake in the matter. And then we also make sure that the pet is spayed and neutered. I would say, I haven't looked at the numbers in a bit, but at least half of the pets that receive grants from us were not spayed or neutered at the time. And in fact, probably about a quarter of them were fixing a pyometra, which is just super sad that it's a completely preventable disease. And then when it happens, it's a completely fixable disease, and there's animals dying from it. And it's a lot to do with the financial, but also the education. And that's a component of our mission as well. And we're just, too small and mighty to get that done to the amount that I would like, but we'll hopefully get there. We're growing. We've doubled the amount of money that we've given out every year since we got our 501c3 status on March 2020. So literally a week before shutdown and lockdown. So we've been doing this virtually for a while now, but we've given well over $600,000 out and helped like 225 pet parents keep their pets with them. So
wow. From the veterinary team side of things, when you do have these situations, it's really good to know these types of resources. Maybe go ahead and look ahead of time so you can be familiar with it, chat about it, have another option for your pet owner when that happens. So last question, I think I might slide in one more, but last question, because again, you do career coaching and leadership coaching. Through all of your experience, whether it's your own work experience, but also working with others, trying to help guide them in those areas, what would be a big piece of advice that you would give, just kind of in general from those lessons that you would give to the veterinary community?
Maybe it goes back to the concept of self-awareness and mindfulness and just really taking the time to think through what's important to you, because that's one of the intersections between like coaching and mentoring and advice giving, if you will, is that a lot of times when we're giving advice, it's from our own perspective, and that perspective may or may not work for another person. And so the flip with coaching is that I need to get your perspective out of you because you might not know it yet. And so that's one of those pieces that however you need to kind of sit with yourself, and everybody does this differently, whether it's working with a coach I did early in my career to try to kind of figure out what I really wanted to do, to, talking with your friends or talking with a mentor. But the important thing is it's got to come from you. And I think a lot of times, we see other people acting a certain way or wanting a certain thing, and it might not be what's really in our hearts and what's really in our minds. And getting to that point of like really understanding where you're coming from and what you want is so important. It's one of the things that when I teach about negotiation, I'm like, you can negotiate for whatever you think your friend just got, but why don't you negotiate for what you really want? Sometimes sitting down and going through that exercise is hard, because a lot of times when you're deciding what you really want, you also have to then, the flip side is there's things that I can't have. And that's at the business level. Like, I really want to grow the business over here. Well, that means I can't grow it over there. Or to grow it over there and here, I need to do X, or I can't do X, or I have to stop doing Y, or something like that. There's always a trade-off. So I don't know if it's because they're afraid of the trade-offs. They don't want to commit to a certain path. And committing to a path doesn't mean you can't turn around and go back. You just need to commit to it. And so I think the advice, if you will, is to get to know yourself. And that can be scary. Sometimes you need a guide.
I agree with that. I will slide in one last question, because I'm curious about you personally. When it comes to you, what are you most grateful for?
Yeah, I'm grateful for my friendships, both within the industry and outside of the industry, and the people that I've connected with, and learning their stories and understanding that their story is not my story, but it's a really interesting story. I've been very grateful to have a very supportive family, and I know that not everybody does. So I think, that's one of the pieces, and now you're gonna make me tear up.
Oh.
That's one of the pieces that if, you have to have that support, whether it's family or friends or however it comes, and to be grateful for it, and to cultivate it with intent. I've been lucky to have that.